Okay. Okay, there's no one in the waiting room right now, so.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the June Comprehensive Plan Task Force meeting. We are going to be talking about Chapter 4, Resource Protection as Green Infrastructure. You all received this chapter last month, so there's been a lot of time to review it, and basically this is one of the priority subject chapters. With this chapter, we will have 3 of the 6 priority subject chapters reviewed by the task force. So moving forward with this, again, this is Chapter 4, Resource Protection as Green Infrastructure, and resource protection talks about natural resources, scenic resources, open space resources, and also historic resources. We added the vision in the chapter just so you can keep track of what the vision is. Of course, this will not be in the chapter. This will be in another part of the plan, as I say every month, but it's just good for you to be able to compare what recommendations and what goals are in this chapter compared to, you know, the overall vision for the township to make sure they continue to mesh. So the goal and the aim is this text in blue. Does this seem okay to everybody, what this says, or are there refinements that are needed for this goal?
Looks good to me.
Can everybody see this, or should I make the font a little bit bigger? Is that helpful? Or does it matter?
Janine, it looks fine to me.
Okay,
Looks
great.
okay to me also.
Okay, so let's move down to background information. So basically, as we do in all the chapters, we have a very brief synopsis of what the community input was related to resource protection. And so you can see there is strong support for resource protection of various types. And we do list the percentages. A lot of this background information does come from the survey that was conducted. There were also interviews done. And then there was also the January public meeting that we did. And then we also did a workshop back last September. So it does take into account that information. Obviously, the survey is the only information we have that actually has percentages, because the other information was information we heard, you know, wrote down. But you can see in particular, when we look at specific types of resources that should be protected, groundwater, streams, ponds, wetlands, wildlife habitat, open space, dark skies, were some of the most important, as well as nature preserves and open space. Those were top land uses. So we tried to establish the whole chapter and the recommendations and the goals around that community input. We also got input during the planning process about protecting natural resources from invasive species and herbicides and pesticides. And then we talked about agricultural uses employing nutrient management or conservation plans to protect the long-term health. And that goes back to the water quality also. So moving on to after we do community input, then we look at the context. And the context is really the bigger county context. We're drilling down slowly. So we start with the county, and we start with the county comprehensive plan and what it says about Franklin Township, and specifically Franklin Township in reference to natural, historic, and scenic resources. And so we talk about that next. And then we also talk about Franklin Township within the more specific region, meaning the London, Britain, Cecil County, Maryland, Elk Township, et cetera region. And that's where we come into play on this next paragraph. And then also the general historic resources. Does
Janine,
anybody? Yes.
I did have a comment on the first paragraph.
Under context?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
like, I think it's the third sentence. where you say, let me read it here. This
Together?
designation, yeah, let me read it. This
Okay.
designation captures overall countywide resource areas, contextual pattern rather than locations of every specific resource itself. And
Right.
then the next one about the heritage tourism. What I'd suggest you say is heritage tourism is an economic driver in Pennsylvania and Chester County.
Okay, let me add that. Okay, I made that change. So thank you for that input. Does anybody else have any changes that should be made to this context? Okay, if not, then I'm going to move down to and now we get into the Franklin Township specific existing conditions related to resource protection. So we start looking at biotic resources and water resources. Biotic resources are things like your wetlands and those types of resources. And we talk about that. And then we talk about some of the DEP designations for water quality. We went into some detail about water quality because that was one of the items that the groundwater, et cetera, was one of the items that the residents called out as very important. So we wanted to focus, a little bit more on that than maybe we would have on some of the other natural resources. So we went in to talk about that and talked about some of the impaired streams, and then also talked about, areas of moderate slope or moderate steep and steep slopes generally along the banks of the water courses. And why, of course, that is important is because if there's erosion on those banks, then it erodes right into the sediment, erodes right into the streams, and then, of course, causes problems for stream health and potential for water quality health. Then we move on to open space and parklands. I did get an answer to this after the mailing was sent out. It was either 2002 or 2003, and I can't remember which one it was, but I'll double check that.
I believe it was 3.
Okay.
And Janine, there are, I get a report from Chester County as to how much land is preserved. And right now, the report that Chester County puts out is Franklin Township has 34% of our acreage preserved in one way or another. So this doesn't quite add up to what you have there. Now, we can go over these numbers later if you would like. We don't have to do it right here tonight. But I know one of the supervisors who couldn't be on tonight, Donna D, she made some comments about this section. I don't know if you want me to read them or just tell you. Basically, it's a little bit of the history, when the tax, how much the tax increase was to allow, for the open space program, and that she wanted to state that there is an open space loan in place that has allowed us to purchase the preserves.
And we do talk about the open space fund. I mean, we can add more information. I just want to clarify for everybody, agricultural retention was talked about in a different chapter. And so I had received a document from the township that outlined very specific how each parcel was preserved and what type of funding was used. And so this 27% number really talks about the preserved open space. It's not talking about the ag land. You're right, 34% is the full number, but the rest of that number is taken up in the ag land. So because we split these chapters, maybe it's misleading, but I'm just trying to explain, because we split the chapters into having an ag preservation and ag retention chapter, and this is more of the resource protection chapter, and it was agreed in the ag protection chapter that ag soils would go in that chapter. For whatever reason, that's what was agreed to. The ag soils aren't in this chapter, so the ag protection is in that other chapter. So we can certainly add a line then that's why we say this figure does not include preserved land that is discussed in chapter 3. But we can certainly maybe add a line after that saying, if you add all the preserved land together, then, it totals the 34% number. Would that make everybody feel more comfortable?
I have something to say. I think the 34% includes the HOAs. So we can go back and look at the numbers. I have the numbers. I don't have.
It does include HOAs, Dan.
Right. And so when we're talking about preserved open space, we want to talk about HOAs.
We
Janine?
do
Yeah,
or
and
we
I
don't?
think 27% does include all of that. Nan, I had that document that you gave me from the township, and that's what I used.
Right. But I think if you look at the 27%, it doesn't include the HOAs, which is what, I don't,
Okay.
I personally don't say that that's open space preservation. So,
Well, it
but
can't
I'll
be
go-
used
we'll
for
have to
anything
I'll go
else.
back and look,
yeah,
but
you and Joan work it out.
we'll just
Figure
work
out
it
what
out.
percentage you want to use. Okay.
Yeah, the ag land definitely is not taken into account here. So that, to be crystal clear about that.
Okay.
So it is a little, I don't want to use the word misleading, because it's not for the purposes of this chapter, but somebody that's looking for a total number is not going to find that here. So yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to make a note. Okay, so we have those notes. And Joan, at that time too, if you want to provide me with any information from, the feedback you've gotten
Okay,
to address ag land, and I'm going to say, and the feedback provided about the history. So we'll just talk about that offline then. Thank you for the information. Okay, moving on.
Janine,
Go into some little bit of,
Janine?
yes.
can we go back to the paragraph before open space and parklands? The section that talks about, water, and then there's a sentence there, areas of moderate, steep and steep slopes fall along the banks of water courses, and floodplains along, vegetated buffers, lands. What is the purpose of that statement? Or do
Well,
we want,
twofold. One is in this section, we were trying to cover all basically the types of biotic resources. So steep slopes, hydric soils, etc., are types of biotic resources. So we were just trying to cover them so people know, if they're reading this document, that Franklin does have some moderately steep and steep slopes, and generally speaking, where they're located. That was the first item, but it also sets the stage for when we talk later about, erosion and some of the water quality issues. It also kind of sets the stage for that. Do you want a little bit more explanation here?
yeah, I
That'd be
think it's
helpful.
important. I think it's important, for that section to say that, moderate and steep slopes that are adjacent to water courses are particularly, important, to maintain, or not important to maintain, but, that, we have to make sure that they're in good shape, that they are not allowing erosion.
You say they should be protected?
Well, they already are protected because they're steep slopes, but maybe.
Try to minimize something like to try to minimize runoff
Yeah,
and sediment into water courses. Something like that. that could compromise water quality, health, or something like that. I'll work on the wording, but I think that's what you're getting at.
That is what I'm getting at. Thank you.
Ooh, there's a lot of creative spelling here. Okay, are there any other questions about this section? Okay, good. So then moving down to historic resources. We do talk about how the historic resources definitely play a role in Franklin Township's rural character. It's not just all open, it does have, you know, that cultural landscape of the built environment, many of which still do exist in various places, particularly they're scattered throughout the township, and then there's a concentration in the village, which is commemorated through the National Register of Historic Places eligible district, and then also the local historic district that's regulated under the HARB. And then we talk about the Historical Commission and the HARB and what they do. And then just a little bit about the Atlas project that was just completed, the Historic Resource Atlas, and what, you know, what the point of the project is, and the fact that it exists. So you do have a baseline of information for where your historic resources are and what they are. Are there any questions about
I
that?
don't know that 50 years is accurate. There's a lot of buildings that are 50 years old that are not designated.
In the Atlas, you mean?
Well, that we don't consider to be historic in the township.
Oh, okay. Well, the
Yeah.
goal of the project, the Atlas project is a county-wide project, and it uses the National Register criteria. And the National Register of Historic Places as the baseline looks at 50 years or older. So we use the same criteria to follow the standard practice in the United States. I don't know if Paul, do you want to speak a little bit more about this? I thought I heard you start to say something.
Yeah, I can clarify. I think that you're both right, which sounds a little weird, but the Atlas is based on the 2004 Historic Resource Survey that the township undertook and was in the township's hands long before the Atlas. As a result of simply the nature of the passage of time, there are undoubtedly some properties that are now 50 years old or somewhat older that were not in the original survey, and the survey has not been updated in that respect, but that the survey does cover our oldest properties.
So my point would be maybe we don't say 50 years because we're not identifying all the buildings that are 50 years or older.
Well, this is just talking about the Atlas project. It's saying the Chester County Commission's Historic Resource Atlas project, the Atlas project is designed to. So it may not be an accurate statement for the Township Atlas, and we can clarify that here, but we have to write that it's an accurate statement for, you know, the county's project. So we would write here and clarify the Township Atlas, yeah, you know, and then expand on what the Township Atlas does.
Yeah, you could just say it's based on a 2004 survey, and that should imply that, you know, 50 years was the guideline at that time.
Was it called the Township Historic Resources Survey?
Yes.
Okay. And Paul, if you want to like get back to me if you have any other suggestions on this wording, since you're the Harbin Historic Commission representative, I'd appreciate it.
The reason I bring it
Okay.
up is because the school is over 50 years old. And I don't believe it ever shows up. And there's other buildings that probably fall into the same category.
Do you know, Paul, if they show up in the Atlas? I didn't review every single resource. There's a bunch on the Atlas, so.
Yeah, he is correct, but the school, I believe, would not have been 50 years old in 2004.
Okay.
Yeah, but the map that we're looking at is supposed to represent everything 50 years and older? Is that?
Well,
No,
I think this, if you accept this qualification here, the Township Atlas is based on the 2004 survey. If you want to further clarify it, you could simply say, and includes all properties 50 years older at that time.
I guess I'm just confused. The map that we're looking at is the Atlas map or it's the township map?
it's the township as Atlas map.
Right,
You can even more.
so everybody in different townships in the county have done their atlases at different times. So there probably is no standard reference date countywide just because of time creep.
So where do we want to settle this?
I think 50 years is a little dangerous because I think that 50 years, all of a sudden, we're going to have a lot of properties
Well,
that fall in that 50-year frame.
but Chuck, is this wording okay with you? Does it clarify it and not?
I mean, the thing is, if you're going to go with national standards, which generally, like your National Register Historic District does, then that is a 50-year standard. So if the township wants to do something different, I'm not saying you can't, but you would definitely have to consider your reasoning behind it and make sure it's a justifiable reasoning. The state also uses the 50 years and older, time frame. So I think there would just have to be an explanation for why the township went in a different direction and what that reason was. And if there is a reason, we can certainly write it in the comp plan, but I think that needs to be a consideration as opposed to just saying 75 years is the number or 100 years is the number.
No. So it is 50 years, but it's 50 years
Based on
in
2004.
2004.
Right.
So we did not reject the 50-year criteria, but the question becomes at some point, if we want to revisit and update the survey, that's an expenditure and a choice that's different than in 2004 we used the 50-year standard.
Right. And you just stuck to that same standard this time around when you just completed the Atlas. You didn't start over again, basically, is what you're saying.
Basically, we did not update the 2004 survey except with respect to, for example, demolitions and the like. The loss of something that was recorded in 2004 but no longer exists is not recorded on the map.
Just a
So
quick
I'm going to
question.
say it's largely based on.
So I just have a quick question. If we just leave 50 years is just a baseline that we use to decide whether or not we consider something for preservation, right? So if I live in a residential neighborhood that has 50-year-old houses, it's not like we automatically have to take action, right? It's
No, so I would put it this way: 50 years is essentially the national standard for determining whether something may be considered historic and worthy of preservation. Just because something is 50 years old does not mean it's considered worthy of preservation necessarily by the community or the state for that matter. And just because something dates to 150, if it's been remodeled, as one of the magazines I used to receive called it, it would not be considered worthy of the National Register. The state would not worry about it if they wanted to put, a highway through the property. So age is not the only determinant. Age is simply a cutoff standard for taking a hard look at something.
okay. So that's just my point, is that if we all of a sudden, every community has lots of buildings that are 50 years or older, but it doesn't all of a sudden cripple their ability to do business because there's so much to preserve. That's just the baseline criteria. Okay.
Well,
got it.
It's a tool, basically. It's a review tool.
right.
Yeah.
The other thing, Dave, that you have to understand is this only matters if you have resource protection in place to deal with this. Outside of the Kemblesville Village, there is no resource protection in place. So really what you're asking is moot. It doesn't matter whether anything is 50 years old or 100 years old outside the village. The township does not offer it any protection.
Gotcha. All right. So I guess the idea here is that whether we make it 50, 100, or 2 years, it's kind of irrelevant. It's just we may as well just stick with the national or whatever the guideline is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying, 25 years an antique car these days? That doesn't mean you look at a 25-year-old car and think that's antique or think it's worthy of preserving.
Right. I understand.
What year was the atlas? The Township Atlas was completed in 2020, right?
Yes.
Okay, maybe if we add a date to it, it'll clarify it a little bit because we have the 2004 dates floating around.
Right.
And
That
is
would
this an
be
accurate
accurate.
statement, Paul?
Right.
Changes made for the atlas primarily reflect historic resources that have been demolished since the 2004 survey?
Correct.
Okay. So maybe all this additional wording I have, and also maybe putting it in its own paragraph and separating it from what the county's doing. You know, because now we're saying this is what the county's doing, and now we have what the township is doing. I don't know.
You know what? Here, you know what?
Anyway, I'll fuss with
suggest?
it a little bit, but I get the gist of where you're headed. How's that sound?
Janine, I would suggest just one small change where you say
Sure.
the Atlas Project, call that the county's Atlas Project.
Okay.
Okay. I think that will help clarify that we're talking about two different beasts. It's sort of over-determined, but I think it may be helpful in this context.
And maybe I could say something like the township. I'm going to say this: the township completed a township atlas, something like that, in 2020, just to clarify that it's a different thing. It's related.
Yeah, you can say municipal atlas and not have to repeat township.
My objection is that it says that are 50 years and older as a starting point. That just opens everything wide up. And I don't know that we need, I mean, that's only one aspect of what the county project designates. So my objection is to.
But I think it's factual. I think that's what it does designate right now.
Yeah,
Chuck.
but there's a lot of other facts that go into that 50-year thing and that are not pointed out here. So why are we pointing out one problematic fact and saying we can't take that fact out?
Well, I don't think it's problematic. First of all, I think it's based on a lot of historic resources programs that have been going on since the 60s, basically. So I think it's a standard. It's a standard benchmark. But are there other items, Paul, that we should be including in here? It was the 50-year older mark that you used, right?
No,
Yeah, it
Janine,
was.
Paul, could I just say, it says it's a starting point.
Right.
So that doesn't exclude other considerations. So I think.
Could you add, the Township Atlas includes historically relevant properties, 50 years or older?
No, because that would not, that's an unnecessary description. The Township Atlas includes all properties 50 years or older at the time.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So,
Yes, it classifies them.
That doesn't mean that we say you can't touch these properties. It's just a census of everything that's 50 years or older. That's all it is.
so that's happening anyway.
It's happened.
Right. So whether we put it in here or not, it happens regardless.
Right. I mean, I think this is Janine is right. This is an extremely accurate description, not only of what is a national standard for
Yeah.
beginning the consideration of a house as historic unless there are, sometimes criteria like certain great architecture that might be, recognized in advance of this. But otherwise, it's 50 years. And then all that means is it's 50 years old and worthy of being surveyed. It doesn't mean anything, and recorded as 50 years old. It doesn't mean anything beyond that. That comes later. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Chuck?
Um,
Well, you are
Well-
the one with the big objection.
yeah, because I think that if we look back 50 years ago, 1970, and we
Right.
look at all the buildings that existed in our township in 1970,
Right.
we're gonna all of a sudden, but I mean, and
But this says basically that we were looking at 1954.
Because it starts at 2004, Chuck. It doesn't start
Right.
at 2020.
64. Is that what you said?
54. No, 54. 50 plus
Oh,
50 and
okay.
54 is 2004.
So this is a 16-year-old.
Exactly. See, you're actually raising a different question, which is at what point does the township decide it wants to update its survey? But that problem doesn't exist right now. The township's not deciding to do that.
Okay. Well, but the county, okay.
No, the county's happy with what we submitted.
Okay.
They didn't complain. We made them wait so long, they were happy to get it out of my hands.
The county has a program with guidelines, but again, this is a tool. It's not regulations. So the county has a program with guidelines, and if you want to participate in the program, obviously there's core guidelines, but each municipality designs their own atlas. So we have, I don't know how many we have done now. We probably have, do you know, Mason, how many?
I do. The exact number I don't, but it's in the 30s.
Okay.
I think Franklin
Maybe
did
half
theirs
ish.
in 2020, and then the most recent was London Britain next door did theirs this past year.
Okay, thank you. So each municipality has their slight twist and bend on what the atlas is to them, but it's an overall county, project, and the county does the mapping for the municipalities, so the municipalities doesn't have to pay to do that mapping, and works with the historical commission, and it's a back and forth process. So the county provides more, staffing basically, and then some technical assistance, but it's largely a volunteer municipal project with the help of county staffing. So it's not like an ordinance, it's more like a tool. It's more like a guidance tool, like creating a manual.
I will defer to everybody else. That's fine.
Okay. So moving on to recommendations and actions. We will move down to the first recommendation, and that is, again, to reflect the survey results. We're protecting surface and groundwater resources. And then we have a little write-up on why to do this. And then we go right into the specific actions. And the first action is the how, examine township code, chapter 26, yada, yada. And then we created points under those actions. The bullet points are either to-do steps or there's support information to implement the action. You have all seen the recommendations. You've all seen the actions. What's new to you is the write-up on why do this. And then what's also new to you are that either the action steps or the additional information. Does anybody have any comments?
Nope, I don't have any comments.
Okay, so we will then move on to the next, and again, you have seen this how, and the voluntary landowner restoration. Here we're getting into the planting the hillsides. I don't know if we should say hillsides to address, I think, Chuck's concern, and say something like hillsides slash slopes, like steep slopes, moderate and steep slopes. Just so people know, more specifically, and it ties back then to the first, the first point earlier in the chapter. And then these are the
Can-
action.
Can you add adjacent to water?
Uh,
Yeah, I don't want to get into a situation where we're defining all steep slopes the same.
okay. Well, we go into that more here. Steep slopes or erosion and the importance of riparian buffer. We can probably talk about it a little bit more in here. I don't really want the action to get too long. Maybe we should get rid of the word hillsides, because that could mean any hillside. That's probably too generalized. Oops. I need track changes back on. Does everybody else want me to add adjacent to waterways? There might be other steep slopes you want to be protecting. I don't know. There might be steep slopes that run off into roadways and cause flooding on roadways or erosion on roadways. Hey, Kathy.
Sorry I was late. Thanks, guys.
Oh, no problem.
So listening to this, isn't it just more about erosion and runoff prone areas, and just stay silent on any slope or grade of slope?
I would agree with that.
So should we just say slopes then and get rid of this?
I don't even know if I would just say slopes. Isn't the spirit of this any area that erodes or has runoff?
So should we go back to hillsides?
Again, I'm not even sure what goes up is up, right? I don't know. We have more talented people than me on this, but just thinking about a flat place that just so happens, by the eye, it doesn't even look like it's a slope, but somehow it causes runoff into the road. Or I'm thinking of a spot down here on 896 right down the road for me. That looks flat, but it floods. It's
So
a
I
low
think then we're
line.
okay, because we say planting hillsides and other erosion and runoff prone areas. So I think we're covering it all then, maybe.
Good.
Planting erosion prone areas.
And runoff prone areas.
I would take hillsides out. Planting erosion.
I think we should still say
prone areas.
hillsides. I think that was a big deal for the residents, or something about slopes.
So I'm concerned that if we force all development in good farmland and we want farmland, aren't we contradicting ourselves? We can't have both. If you eliminate all steep slopes and continue to eliminate everything with a little bit of a slope from being developed, and you develop your farmland, then you turn around and you have no farmland, because every time there's a downturn, the farmland gets developed as a development, and we're keeping everybody off of any slope. And there's definitely slopes that aren't as, now the slopes that are right along waterways are very important to maintain, but I don't want to start using the term steep slopes to mean that is an area of negative impact,
Right.
because there could be steep slopes that have little or no impact on the water, which would make a much better place for a development than a nice flat piece of fertile land that would make a great farm.
I mean, the bottom line is, I guess you can't protect every resource, whether it's natural resource, historic resource, potentially. And if you're going to have areas open for development, which obviously is a right of people to have development, then there'll have to be a prioritization. What a lot of municipalities do is, and you have this in your subdivision ordinance, I believe, site responsive development. So you basically have a hierarchy of what you're looking for in terms of what'll be preserved based on that particular site. So that particular site may have really important woodlands, and that may be the key thing to preserve on that site, but another site may have virtually no woodlands, and the farmland may be important to preserve. I think overall, though, I mean, it's going to be a policy decision, but if development occurs and the slopes are running down into the road or in people's houses or into the streams, then it's going to be a problematic development. So I don't know how you want to address that. That just will be, it'll be a problem.
So Janine, I think the answer is right before us in bullet 1. What do you guys think about promoting the land stewardship actions to minimize negative impacts on surface water? I think the themes here are reversed. The promote voluntary landowner restoration seems like a very specific instruction, whereas the spirit is to promote, private land stewardship actions designed to minimize negative. That sentence seems like the overarching how. And then this planting hillsides, restoration of I don't even know how to pronounce it, riparian buffers, or how do you pronounce that? Teach me.
You pronounced it right.
Riparian?
Riparian, yeah.
Okay. I don't know. What do you guys think about that to elevate that more global statement in the how and put the detail down in the bullet?
So basically, generally speaking, this statement I'm highlighting.
Yeah.
And just to run up here for a second, we are under the major recommendations still of surface and groundwater. I know it's easy to get lost in the details. I get lost in the details myself. So maybe we go with Kathy's suggestion and basically copy this and do a paste up here.
Janine, in on the next sentence, I have a comment.
Okay.
I like that.
And then, oops, I forgot to turn on track changes. Whoops. Oh, well. And then we cut this. And then, do we say consider partnering with? So we can just almost add this down here. I don't know for now. I'm just adding this down here.
Yeah, because it's a more specific guidance.
Yeah, and let me just cut this for 1 second so we have it underlined so everybody can see what we're doing. Okay, so now that would be our new statement. We'll highlight it so everybody can see it there. Okay, I think that's a good suggestion. And then we can provide information on the township. And I think it's okay to repeat this, provide information on the township or property owners to encourage, the stewardship actions.
Great.
And on the second sentence, I think you should,
This sentence,
yeah.
Gary, right here?
Specifically. The way I did it is said specifically include information on.
Okay, I made that change.
The other way, it just seemed a little cumbersome.
Yes, thank you.
It's more better.
I like that. Does anybody else have any comments on these action steps or background information before we move on to the next major action item? So then we're considering the last major action item under this recommendation is considering restoration demonstration projects on township properties. And we did talk about that, and a lot of information you're seeing here is what we had just brainstormed of what might be possibilities for what could happen on township properties. So if everybody's okay with that, I'm going to move on to the next recommendation, which is to protect other natural resources. So we've covered water resources, and because again, the survey results and the other public input said that water was pretty much the single most resource to protect, that's why we segmented it out into its own thing. Now we're getting at all the other natural resources, and we're basically combining them all back together and looking at all the other resources. So this is sections covering a lot, but it does reflect what the survey results came back as what was most important, versus other things that were most important or important. So how does everybody feel still about the recommendation, and then also the why do this? And here we're getting into the whole idea of this chapter is the greening of the infrastructure, and not necessarily always having to rely on quote unquote man-made or hardscaped infrastructure. Trying to use what's in nature and where it needs to be repaired, restored, etc. Do that, and then let the natural systems do what they are supposed to do for filtration and other shade and other positive benefits to the township. Does anybody have any comments on this wording or? And if we're not, we'll move on to the first action item, which is to provide website links to information materials for landowners on how to restore and maintain the natural resources on their properties. And so then we look at education.
First sentence, Janine,
Yes?
educating township residents rather than educating township property.
Oh, that's probably a good idea. Probably it was meant to say property owners.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think we want more than just educating the owners. Don't we want to educate everybody that resides in the township?
Okay, educating property owners and residents. Thank you. So then we have the type of information that can be provided. We have information about the materials, and then working with other groups, conservancies, etc., to link to information.
Janine, I have a comment from Donna on the third bullet, the second sentence.
Okay, where it says it should also address.
Yes, it should also address the equivalent built man-made infrastructure requires. Something's missing there.
Okay, I think it should just say required. But I'll check it out to make sure.
Okay, then what, and one other comment she made in that section, and you can address this how you see fit. She said, why do we have to pit man-made against green infrastructure? Can't we keep the focus on how they should work in concert?
Well, I think the only reason they're pitted against each other is because the entire premise of this, when this priority subject area was chosen, through the task force and through the public process, it was clear that having green infrastructure as the priority and really minimizing man-made infrastructure, as opposed to having them kind of on equal footing, having green infrastructure was the priority for this chapter and for the township.
Okay.
So unfortunately, it does come across as pitting them against each other, but that was the basis of the feedback and the discussion we had. So.
Well, there's plenty of you can do green infrastructure that is man-made. The man-made green infrastructure can be much more natural. And I think that's what Donna was trying to get at.
Right. And I understand that point. My point is that when these priority subjects were chosen, that wasn't where everybody was headed at the time. Everybody was headed at enhancing the natural systems to do what they do better. If we go down the path that we're suggesting, then that really changes the general gist of this, and we would have to really go back and look at, more. I'm not saying that can't be done, but that's a policy question for the task force overall. If we're going to be heading in that direction, because it's a slightly different conversation than we had initially. So that's all for you to, decide amongst yourselves and talk to us about where you want to go with this.
Yeah.
And probably a good time to talk about it now, because you're going to keep seeing this over and over again in this chapter.
Well, I think the question is, there's a preference for natural resources, but within that statement, it says they can be used preferentially or at least in concert with man-made facilities. So I can talk to Donna offline about her concern, but I think in that line, it says, while green infrastructure, at least the way I read it, it's inferred, while green infrastructure may be preferable, we should at least be looking at how all of these systems can work in concert, right? So that's how I read it. It doesn't say we're not going to do man-made. It's just, let's just make sure that when we do, it works in concert with the green natural resources, or at least look at it, right? So.
And we can go further, Dave, also to maybe say in concert with man-made facilities that could also be designed using like greening, like using greening strategies or using greening methods. We could say something like that, because I think that was one of her points. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it captures what Chuck was saying too, is that, I'm thinking of a couple of examples in my head now of man-made green infrastructure concepts that work, or help man-made facilities work in concert with natural facilities. So I don't know if that captures it, Chuck.
Yeah. And a good man-made solution, in my mind, is actually a natural solution that we're helping. So we may be reestablishing a natural solution that was destroyed, but that's a man-made solution. So it's not one or the other. They can definitely be both.
And I think in general terms, Chuck, I understand what you're saying, but my interpretation of the feedback we got is whether humans are restoring the natural environment or bringing back something that was there 50 years ago and got destroyed, or whether humans are allowing the natural environment to thrive and do its natural duties. I was under the impression that the feedback grouped both of those into one and didn't make that specific distinction. But then once we started talking about man-made, people were talking more about what we see traditionally with concrete and hardscaping. So I understand you're getting into a very fine nuance, but I did not read, and certainly we did not design the survey or any of the feedback where we were getting into that level of distinction between the different types of natural systems and how they would come about. So perhaps this is more of a less detailed approach and just calling it greening, natural greening, as opposed to how it got to be the natural greening. I just wanted to make that clarification, what we looked at for the feedback. Does anybody else have any comments on this section before we move on to actions? The next action?
I have one comment, Janine.
Okay.
All this interfering with natural versus, what man did, would this tie into like how we have changed our natural landscape and built houses and lawns and roads and taken away the woods and the meadows and all that? Is that what we're talking about here? It seems to me like we are, and we need to go back to more of that woods.
It is what we're talking about. Yes.
Okay, well, we drastically changed it, and I think it's a really current in the state of Pennsylvania anyway, and I'm sure other states. Like, we have drastically changed our landscape and therefore changed, habitat for birds, insects, everything. And we need to truly rethink this. We need to put it back to the way it was naturally, so that we can. So life continues. Bottom line, life continues, and it cannot continue with our nice big green lawns that we mow every week. I don't know how you put that in words there, but I think that's huge what we're trying to do.
So would it be better if we added a little bit more clarification to the section then to indicate what Mary just said, or what we can? I just want to make sure that's the direction everybody wants to go in, or is what we said sufficient here, or how does everybody want to take that?
Well, let me say this, Janine. Working with the new pro committee and the wonderful work they've done, we're trying to go in the direction of educating our residents you don't have to have an acre of green lawn. Maybe you could have half an acre of green lawn that you can play baseball on, and another half an acre in meadow and get ground dwelling birds and insects and all. Greg and I, we've talked over and over again. We're trying to go in the direction of educating our township, maybe having classes, to try and educate people. This is the way you want to go. This is what is healthy for our planet, for all of us, and everything we want in our community. I don't know how you word that, but we're working on it. So
yeah, and I think part of it here too is I think for guidance, because if you think about what this document is supposed to do, having the vague is not the right word, but I think the second bullet. All right, we move down here. Yeah, so this third bullet here basically starts to say that, hey, let's look at, let's just be deliberate when we start doing these sorts of infrastructure projects, right? We're going to think about them in terms of green infrastructure, make sure that if we are putting concrete in the ground, that we're thinking about how it impacts the environment around it, and that's sort of the policy, or that would help form policy decisions. And then I don't know. So the only thing I think about here with this first point, Janine, is the pro board is working on materials and programs to guide whatever it is that they're doing.
Right.
That's like a right now thing. Do we put that in our document? Right. Or or say, the pro board works on, maybe you say the pro board works on materials and programs to help guide. All right.
Well, and Dave, to add on to what you said, do we also have to visit how we manage our parks, like, herbicides and all those other things we use to, make the fields usable for baseball? And I mean, I don't know. I think we have to address those issues also.
We have some of that in the demonstration projects, I think, but that's primarily for biodiversity. The township parks, we agreed to primarily talk about them in the infrastructure chapter, because people felt they're technically open space, and the preserves are largely open space. They're kind of a cross between, they're a township facility because they have trails and, users on them. And so I think the preserves are in this weird spot where they could be in this chapter, they could be in the infrastructure chapter. And I think we ended up putting them in the infrastructure chapter because it's a township maintenance issue almost. So it's a capital situation. But I think you bring up, a good point with how to address that. And yes, you could do demonstration projects in the parks. We talked a little bit about that up further with the demonstration projects, but there could be all kinds of demonstration projects that help with this education.
Okay.
Something like to guide residents on restoration something like maintaining. I'm just making this up right now based on what you just said. Natural features and something like functions of, I don't want to say concrete, but like man-made. Elements. I'll work on that wording, but I'm just trying to capture what you were all saying. I hope what I just wrote is what the pro board sort of does. So
I think that's their aspiration. Aspirationally, they're trying to get to a point where it's really about community involvement more than, the township doing these things. It's the community forward type of event. So I think this would be the aspirational role of the pro.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on to the next action item. So we have promote public-private partnerships on the importance of personal responsibility and stewardships on individual properties. So now we're getting into a little bit further into the weeds, Mary in particular, on best management practices. And this is where we start to get into the pesticides versus herbicides, the meadows, HOA rules. We talked about that in some of our meetings about how the HOA rules can sometimes be in conflict with what might be promoting a healthier natural environment because of some of the requirements. We talked a little bit about HOA rules don't love meadows, and may want all the lawns cut to a certain height and not allow the grasses to grow higher. And then there's this idea of community events to focus on sustainability and environmental stewardship. Does this seem like the right direction to go in for this public and private partnership situation? And this is a little bit different than what we talked about up here, because up here we're talking about website links. So this would basically be on the township, to do the website links. And then this would really be reaching out to partners to see what the township could do to work with others on implementing, some types of actions.
Yeah,
Janine, I agree 100%. And we live in an area where we are surrounded by University of Delaware, Penn State. We just have so many resources for this, and we need to draw on them and educate our citizens, and that's the way to go. We just have tremendous. I mean, the one at UD, Doug Talmy, he's like nationally known for restoring our earth and getting our birds and our insects and all that. He's right down the road. He lives in Oxford. So
Wow.
We have tremendous resources right in our neighborhood. And hopefully we're going to go forward and use that.
You do have tremendous resources. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing what remains in Franklin, and still just the natural environment that feeds into the rural landscape you have.
Yes.
Is pretty special.
Yeah.
So
Why are we pulling HOA rules out as a specific thing?
because we talked a lot about them in some
Okay.
of our prior meetings,
Well, okay.
and so did residents in the in the public meetings and the input process, residents
Okay.
also talked about some of their frustrations with the HOA rules and how they were seemingly directly contrary to maybe what the residents wanted to do or what some of the best management practices are.
Then maybe we should add to this section that says that we would also try to educate the HOAs on how they can change their rules. Because I don't know that it's a simple thing to do.
Is
It
that
says
in?
here, the pro board can work with existing HOAs to identify areas of HOA's documents that are contrary
Yeah.
and determine what changes can be made.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the goal here so in my mind, the goal here isn't the township tells HOAs and residents how they can have to have their rules set up. It's here's a focus where we might have some weaknesses. We should reach out to those organizations and through education, let them decide for themselves, right? I don't think it's we will co-opt the HOA and tell them how to run their neighborhoods. I don't think that's what this is saying. I don't know if was that your concern, Chuck, that there.
That's my
Yeah.
concern is,
Yeah.
well, I had two concerns is that HOAs, they serve their own purpose.
Right.
And also, I'm not sure, I don't know, I don't have an HOA, so I don't know how easy or hard it is to change the rules. I thought some of them were actually based on the actual land ownership.
Yeah, I don't know either. I've never been in part of an HOA.
It can be hard to change the rules because a lot of them are, when
Yeah.
the subdivision and land development goes in, the HOA rules are often part of that land
Yeah.
development,
I mean, I think it's good to have
but
it in
it's not
here.
impossible.
Yeah, and I think it's just good to have it in here to be cognizant of that, where, if you do have an HOA that is interested in doing the right thing or doing a different thing, I shouldn't say the right thing, but a different thing, that we are available to help or a pro member is available to help, But I don't think the goal or intent is to make rules, for these neighborhoods.
Thanks.
In my mind, and maybe someone else has a different opinion, but.
Okay, so moving on to the next action item. Examining resource protection zoning standards. So at CCPC, we actually just did, or we're producing a whole document, an inventory, and we've gone through most of the municipality's zoning and looked at how they protect or don't protect natural resources overall. So some of the recommendations you're seeing here came directly through that, or not recommendation, action items came directly through that inventory that we're creating on a county-wide basis. Just so you know, so we had good timing in that. I have no idea why this is highlighted in yellow. Does anybody have any questions or concerns or changes that we should make to this section? I guess this should really say zoning and subdivision land development ordinance, because we have that all over the place in here.
In the fourth bullet,
Mhm.
didn't it say resource protection standards and zoning and SLDO ordinances should address protection?
Well, they do address it right now.
Okay,
They address protection right now. So we're explaining, remember, some of these are steps and some of these are background information. It's kind of a mixed. I mean, we could add, if it's clearer, we could say something like currently.
okay, yeah, that's better.
Okay, moving on to open space preservation. And that is in this chapter also because it is an element of resources as green infrastructure. Does anybody have any changes they want to the why do this portion of this information here? And if not, we'll move on to the first action item, which is to include duties of the pro board to monitor, advise, coordinate, and serve as a liaison and first port of contact, potential open space preservation opportunities. We did talk about this as a group, and also people talked about it definitely in the first public workshop in September, saying there's potential parcels out there and it would be good if an entity in the township were sort of keeping I guess being mindful of what parcels are out there that could be preserved, and maybe talking to landowners who don't understand what the options could be, and just providing them with kind of information and, keeping an eye open just to see what's going on and serving as a liaison. So that's basically entirely where this recommendation came from that feedback. And also it just so happened you were creating the pro board at the same time as we were getting that feedback. So it worked really nicely. Does anybody have any questions about these steps?
In the second bullet, second sentence, it says also they can also help focus. My question was, who is they? Is it the pro board?
This is all the pro board.
Okay.
So.
I would comment, Gerald, that we're going to ask the pro board to do all this work, but they have to bring everything before the board. And I think it's becoming obvious that it costs money for open space. So therefore, at some point, when all this is adopted, I'm thinking the board may have to address what money do we want to allocate to save for this eventual possible open space we want to preserve. Like I'm thinking the rental money on the cell tower in the park, that we need to put a little portion of that aside for, okay, if an open space project comes up and it's $100,000, as anything else in life, you have to save for that. So that I'm looking at that as a discussion going forward as a board once this comprehensive plan is done. But yeah, anything the pro board does, it has to come before the board and get approved. But we truly rely on them, but they don't make any final decisions, the board does. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions about these particular items? Okay, so then the next item is the next action item is to continue to coordinate with property owners, yada, yada, to promote open space preservation projects. We did hear a resounding, basically a resounding support from residents in all of the public forums that we had, the workshop, the survey, the interviews, and then the public meeting that was in January, that open space preservation, along with ag preservation, but this chapter just talks about open space preservation, continues to be a #1 priority for residents. And I realize it's expensive, and I realize we've had the conversation about funding, and the township right now has, the bond to pay off and is paying that off. And, but this, we talked about including this as an action item. So we're trying to support the action item by some of the items we've talked about, in this group, and then some of the things we've heard outside of this group. And just how to continue the open conversation and the dialogue and the coordination. And not saying the township in and of itself is going to take on all the responsibility. Maybe some, maybe not, but definitely to keep that coordination open so that there are options going forward in the future. Does anybody have any comments about the specific action items that are listed here, or?
I do, Janine. Joan, you can give me the numbers better than I can. When we originally started charging rent for that cell tower that's not in the park but right outside it, we were talking $10,500. It's up to about 120, 160 a year. Is that right, Joan?
It's approximately 160,000 a year now.
Okay. Okay. So that money is no longer in the park. It has transferred over to the general fund. So I know most people think that we are subsidizing open space, but if you look at the rental money from that cell tower, I really think the cell tower is subsidizing our general fund. So there's money we could work with. It's like a shell game with money, which I think has been going on. So that's what I think the board needs after this comprehensive plan is done, what we can look at, because there is money there. It's being paid for the rental of that cell tower that we could designate towards open space if we need it down the road. So I don't think anybody's thinking that way, because we've been told no, the open space is funding the deficit in open space. I haven't seen it that way. I've seen it the other way, that the cell tower rental is funding open space. So that's something the board has to discuss based on what the comprehensive plan tells us, and we'll revisit all that. But it's something I would like everybody to start thinking about.
And maybe too, Mary, that's something, we're not done with this topic, but I'm just going to scroll down to the leveraging funding topic that we have a number of action items under. Do you think it's worth adding something as specific as just saying, we have a lot of EGs in here for examples. So we could say, for example, the leasing money generated from the cell tower could be a consideration for leveraging funding?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm just going to put it down here for now. I'll figure out where it fits exactly, but.
Okay.
And I guess in theory, it could be used, I mean, for ag preservation too. It just has to be open space.
No, and I originally, way back in 1995, that board then wanted the money used for the park, the open space / park. You interpret that whatever way you want. I think they meant for the park, but they also said the word open space. I don't know open space was thought of the way it is now. So that's a discussion that needs to be had. But we're talking a lot more money than they were looking at that day. So it's a discussion we could have. There is money there. Everybody has to decide how we want to use it.
Okay, I'm going to go back up to the other point now. We can come back down to this one in a second. I just want to finish off this topic. So this coordination, this idea of coordination, does this sound reasonable, what we have listed for the action, for these action steps and the background information? And if so, I'm going to move back down to the leveraging. Does anybody have any comments on how to leverage funding? And if anything else should be supplemented or added or changed in the bullet points we created? By silence, I'm going to consider we should move on. So this is something that we definitely heard in the public workshop in particular about this whole prioritization, and the golf course property effectively came up as an EG kind of example, and just other potential properties that people started naming, random properties. But the idea of looking at other communities have done this, other municipalities have done this in Chester County, looking at what lands are remaining and, what lands could be considered something the township would like to leverage funding for, or just the township would like to provide support through just having the pro board go out and talk to a property owner and say, these are your options, and maybe connect the property owner to the county or a land conservancy or, whatnot to preserve these resources. Does that sound like something? Do these recommendations seem in line with, not recommendations, sorry, do these action items seem in line with this main action and where you all want to head with that?
One comment, Janine.
Yes.
The fourth line,
Uh-huh.
the pro board isn't going to elicit, it should be elicit.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Janine, is this a place where we want to mention the official map or not now?
We talk about the official map later, I believe. I know. Oh, we talk about the official map a lot more, and we probably should do it because we talk about the official map a lot in the trail ped chapter that we just did last month. So yeah, we could bring up. I'm just going to make a note. Thank you for bringing that up, Dan. Add official map info and maybe cross-reference. Just so we're not repeating, repeating what's already in that chapter. Does anybody else have any questions or comments or? Okay, so this is when we talk about stewardship and maintenance in open space projects. So in the past couple years, the open space funding law in Pennsylvania has been updated to say that 25% of open space funds can actually go towards land maintenance, because what was happening is municipalities were preserving open space, and then the funds in the open space programs weren't allowed to be used for the maintenance. And municipalities were starting to struggle with, now we have all these open space properties, but they're covered in invasives and they need to be planted on the hillsides and the water quality isn't so hot, and on and on and on. So the enabling legislation was changed. And I think that's an important point for the township, to use as needed for maybe some of the open space properties you have. If you have open space funds, then it can now go into, a portion can go into actually maintaining the properties, and in some cases restoring the health, the natural resources of the properties.
It's
So
a great idea, Janine, because this is a 10-year plan. So right now we're at a deficit, but we may not in 10 years. So
right, you may not be at a deficit in 10 years. And even if it's a little bit of money, as Mary was talking about, leveraging from however you want to leverage it. So, okay, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is historic and scenic resources. What you're seeing there is the recommendation. And then we have the background information on why you do this. This information right here is new to you. So if you have any input in it, if any of this information needs to be changed, please let us know now. And we'll give you a second to just read it over in case you've forgotten what's in here. Paul Lagasse, do you have anything to add in here?
Give me a minute.
I think by your silence, it's okay.
No, I'm just, the things I'm seeing are what I would just call minor issues of wording.
Okay, that's fine. We can address that later. I'm just looking for concepts right now.
No, I think you might remove serpentine stone. I don't know that we have any serpentine in the township.
Do you have another kind of stone to replace it with or not?
Well,
Locally
fieldstone is
quarried. Locally
fieldstone
quarried.
is what? Do we have
Locally
quarried stone?
quarried.
I think it's mostly fieldstone. I don't think it's truly quarried in many respects, although there may be houses where that's the case.
Every time you drive by yeah, we have plenty of quarries from when they were building their houses.
Yeah.
I would just
Yeah,
put
the
locally
other-
quarried instead of any kind of stone.
Yeah, period brick.
That's true too.
Yeah.
There's no thick cedar shakes left. They've been replaced.
Do they still make traditional? I don't know if we have any traditional slate roofs still in the township or not. We don't need to list everything. Fieldstone.
No, we don't need
period
to
brick.
say.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the first action item. So we're considering how heritage interpretation can be incorporated. And remember, this gets back to, we're going to talk about this a lot more in Kimblesville, but this is starting to get into tying historic resources, heritage interpretation in with some of these other elements of open space, agritourism, recreation, trails, all of that. So we're starting to lay the groundwork for that here. Does anybody have any comments about these specific bullet points that been drafted? I'm going to try to make this a little bit smaller so maybe we can fit it all on.
I have a question while you're doing that. Do we ever talk about ruins in the township? I'm gonna walk tomorrow over on the Strawbridge property, and there's 4 at least sites where there's just foundations of what used to be there. Do we ever address ruins about protecting that? Or do we not need to do that? We have the 2 churches too, that are just ruins.
We can address that. Paul
What do you think?
Lagasse, is there one of the classifications in the atlas right now? It's usually a class 3 or class 4 that addresses archaeological sites and then ruins.
We do address them. In other words, we do have some ruins included, but the ruins, for example, Nan is talking about are, to my knowledge, not included. And I don't know where they are. They were not surveyed in 2004, but ruins that were known to the folks conducting the survey at the time were in fact recorded in the survey.
Well, just have a quick question. So tomorrow when I take my walk for the trails that are on the state land there across the street from me, I was
Right.
gonna take pictures of the ruins because
Oh, cool.
according to the app, if I take a picture, it records where it is.
Like
So
it'll give you GPS coordinates.
I'm guessing, I don't know. I'm not real
Yeah.
techno savvy. I'm hopeful. But I don't know if that would help you with an atlas or whatever. We could add that in because I know where I'm gonna walk tomorrow. There are 4. There's 4 that I know of.
Yeah, it should, if you have location turned on for the photographs that you're taking, it should record the GPS coordinate. You doing it with your phone?
Yeah, I'm doing it with the phone. I forget the name of the app here. I can look.
Yeah, no, but it should pick up the GPS coordinates because the phone will know that. And that will also allow us to identify them on Google Maps.
Strava is the name of the app that I'm using.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, so.
But it
can't
said I
really
could
tell.
take pictures. I mean, people were supposed to be running and taking pictures, but I assumed I could do it with the ruins. So, but you can add that in. I don't know, but I'm sorry, I don't want to hold everybody up. So in here, yeah, ruins. Let's add something about ruins because we do have some, and we have the 2 churches,
Right.
too.
We'll add them in. I think they're scenic. They're definitely scenic resources, certainly. But I think there could be something about stabilization, of ruins from further degradation. I don't know where that'll fit. I'll have to figure it out, but I'll just put it in here somewhere just for now as a placeholder. Note. And then you'll get some of the photographs, Nan, so we know where some of them are located.
Yeah, that's my intent. I assume if I should go back and take photographs in the winter, because that would be better to see them. I'm sure they're overgrown now, but I'll try. The interesting thing is the ruins in Fair Hill. Somebody went by years ago and planted daffodils, so you can find them in the spring.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
You sure the daffodils aren't original?
It could be, but it's at every ruin in Fair Hill, so you have to wonder.
Yeah, that could be. But it very often daffodils, daylilies will tell you where a house was, even if the all you find is a hole where the cellar once was.
I don't know. Go for a walk with me. I'll show you. Some of them are quite random. There's no house there anymore, but the daffodils are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would expect that, actually.
Okay. All right, whatever. So it's easy to find in the spring and the winter.
Yeah.
So maybe they're not planted, it's natural?
No, they
no,
would
they're
be
definitely
planted by
planted.
the original property owner.
Oh, okay, okay.
Oh, goodness.
Do we talk about archaeological finds? Kind of that next level from ruins? What do we?
You mean like, what do you mean? Like what kind of finds?
An Indian something or other.
Well, there's people that go like in the fields around me when they plow and they look for arrowheads, but they're their own collectors. I don't know. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, in the next 10 years, maybe, somebody's doing some construction and all of a sudden they find significant Indian, a significant Indian archaeological find. Do we talk about that at all? Do we want to talk about that?
We can, yeah.
I think we should add it that if it's found that we should protect them or
Yeah.
I don't know, protect them or
And it doesn't need to be Indian. I mean, it could be early colonial or something like that.
I'm just gonna stick it under here. It's not the right spot, but. Something like their acknowledgement and their preservation.
I mean, in fairness to what is normally done, it may not necessarily be their preservation, in the sense that you think of that as preservation in place. Sometimes it's their, you know, what would you call it?
Documentation.
Well, documentation and yeah, but it's also archaeological recovery. I mean, you don't, if you're going to destroy, if construction will destroy the site, you remove and protect them. You remove and preserve them. You don't preserve them in place. So maybe
Right.
we
I
could
just
say-
said investigation. I think that covers
Yeah.
the whole thing, maybe. So I'll have to figure out where to put that. But anyway. So going back quickly, how does everybody feel about the heritage interpretation stuff that we have here? It is 8:07 and we want to allow 15 minutes for public comment. So I think we can finish wrapping this up, but does anybody have any comments about the heritage preservation? And if not, then I am going to move on to the promote the historical commission as a resource.
Janine, I would say that the one thing that you had there that says consider partnering, we actually do engage in some partnering with local historical commissions, though we have not yet participated in a town tours, village walks type situation.
Okay, so
That's above this. It's off my screen. I can't.
yeah, I think it's off the screen too. Consider a recognition program.
No, up. Next, see where it says that, yeah, it's this bullet that starts consider partnering.
Oh, that's the partnering on events and programs. Okay. So
Yeah.
you guys already partner on events and programs, or?
We partner on programs. We haven't partnered on events.
Okay.
And so.
So maybe we'll just get rid of the word consider and just say partner.
Yeah, well, you could say continue and consider expanding partnering. I mean, that's something like that, but we do it. I don't want that to be diminished, you know.
We'll just say continue partnering on programs and consider expanded partnering to include events, something like that. Okay, great. So then we will move on to what about promoting the historical commission as a resource and liaison? Does this information look about right for how that should go down?
Looks good.
And then people were interested in the CLG program to try to bring additional money into the township. You have a lot of items in place that are the basis of a program. Things might need to be fine-tuned a little bit, but you're, on your way there. And then, of course, you've already talked about the Atlas. I don't think we need to talk about it anymore, but it's just maintaining the Atlas and then considering if you wanted to take it to the next level, which a lot of municipalities have done, which is doing a architectural survey of the township and applying for grant money, for example, under the county's Vision Partnership Program. I'm working with 2 communities right now who are doing just that. They're doing an exterior architectural survey to take their Atlas basically to refine their Atlas and to figure out what's what, to get to Chuck's point, maybe, what's historic, what's architecturally significant, and on and on.
I think that this has actually been accomplished to some degree by our historic resource survey.
The architectural.
Yeah.
We also had somebody come through and do one of these.
Yeah, that's the 2004 survey.
Is
Yeah,
that what
Bill
that is?
Wise, yeah, the Bill Wise did. Yes.
Bob Wise?
Bob Wise, sorry, yes.
Okay.
One of those first names.
Is that what you're referring to, Janine?
Yeah, I could change it up a little bit to just make sure it reflects that the survey was an architectural survey, and maybe it's time to consider over the next 10 years taking another look at it. So something like by updating the 2004 Historic Resources Survey, something like that.
Do we want that? I don't want what I said earlier to be misconstrued into anybody thinking I think the school should be on the historic resource.
Well, the school could
Well, that's what
be
this
on
would
it.
be
It doesn't
vetting,
mean we're
Chuck.
regulating it.
That would be looking at the architecture of it and determining if, based on the architecture of it and the history of it, if it really is a designated historic resource or not. But regulation is a whole nother ball of wax that this isn't handling. This is basically taking the 2004 survey and saying at some point we should look at that survey again in the architectural capacity. The Atlas did not look at it in an architectural capacity per se. It looked at it, as Paul said, and some of these resources are gone now, so we better take them off the list. This would actually be going back and looking and seeing if any buildings were missed or if any buildings should be reevaluated.
Yeah.
So I think
no,
it's a good thing to have as a general recommendation in your historic resources program. And then I'd like to jump to the last action item, which is prevent scenic resources from intrusions. And scenic resources are basically encapsulate all of what we've talked about in this chapter, whether it's natural resources, historic resources, open space resources, agricultural resources, they all come together to create the scenic resources, and the scenic resources directly feed into that rural character of the township. So does anybody have any comments about scenic? And if not, we have a little blurb about how all of this relates back to the township vision. Remember up in blue, we had the township vision. And then we have a lot of resources here listed for you to learn more, maybe the most of any chapter, to learn more about this going forward. So we're at a perfect time. We're at 8:14, and Kathy is the chair of the task force. I don't know if you want to run this, but I was going to suggest now we take public comment.
Let's take public comment.
Is there any public comment? Wow, we always get some public comment. I'm not sure what to make of the silence.
Do you have the matrix? Are we going to work on that or not?
I didn't produce the matrix, but what I thought we could do is just run back through the action items if we had time and prioritize them, Nan. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, if there's no public comment, let's go.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope I didn't just make you dizzy by doing that. So if you remember under the matrix that Nan was talking about, we have a couple different options. We have, and we just do this for the, the recommendations. So we have the option of Act A, which is start something within a 2-year time frame. We have the option on the C, which is look at something within a 5-year time frame of comp plan adoption. We have something called E, which is explore, and that's basically consider the item within the comp plan time frame of 10 years. And then we have the O for ongoing. So in terms of the protecting and restoring the White Clay Creek, and then getting into the actions, remember, we don't go into this level of detail. We just look at the general recommendation and then we look at the specific actions. So looking at the code chapter 26, and then water resource zoning standards, would that be something that should be done within 2 years, within 5 years, or explore it within the 10-year timeframe of the plan? Or just an ongoing element if you're already constantly looking at your ordinances?
I don't think it's been looked at in a while. So Joan, do you have any input on when it was looked at last, or do you know?
Not an in-depth look at that. We're looking at some of our ordinance now just to try and pick up some inconsistencies that, we can put that on the agenda for the PC to take a look at it, one of their meetings.
So would that be like in 2 years, would you guess? Would that be fair?
We could do it within that time frame, yes.
Okay, so we have that as an A. Okay, then moving on to this, encouraging the private land stewardship actions designed to minimize negative impacts on surface water. Is that a 2-year, a 5-year, a 10-year, or an ongoing? I don't know if it's ongoing, but
I mean, I would recommend that we start now, at least to set up the program to start it. Does everybody agree?
Yeah, Nan, I would think this would be an ongoing.
But we need to start it. I don't think we do.
Start it
anything
now
else.
and then it's ongoing. We
Right,
don't wait 2 years to do it. No.
okay.
okay. Demonstration projects on township properties. Is this a 2-year thing? Is this a 5-year thing? Is this a 10-year thing? It's not an ongoing thing, I think, at this point. What would be the appropriate time frame to start it? I don't see this as a 2-year item.
I would agree. I say 5.
Yeah, that would take a lot to start up the demonstration, so we'll put it as a 5-year. Okay, so now we're into other natural resources. So provide website links. Is this something you could do within the next 2 years, or is this a more long-term thing? Or is this something you already are actively engaging in with the new updated website?
I think that's a Dave and Mary question.
Dave, this one is yours. You're the website guy, not me.
It has been punted officially.
Yep. Oh, he went to get a cup of coffee. Anyway.
No, I'm
at
here.
this-
I'm
Okay.
here. I'm here. I'm just had to unmute. So we've got, so the website, we can provide we will be providing links and informational materials. This is something that's pretty easy to do as we acquire them. And I think that's going to be funneled through the pro board. So
it's pretty much every week we can update if we want, right, Dave?
I mean, we can update it as often as we'd like to, and as often as information comes in. But yeah.
Has it been started already then? Can it be considered an ongoing if it's been started, or does it need to be started now?
Well, I think it's ongoing, Janine.
Okay.
We're building on it. We're learning. Our pro committee's new,
Right.
but they're very actively involved. So I think it's ongoing.
Okay, good. This public-private partnership on the importance of personal responsibility. This is definitely not going to be a 2-year thing. I don't think. It's a lot.
What were the choices? 5 and 10 are the next ones?
Yeah, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years.
5 to 10.
Okay, you have to choose 5 or 10, basically. Will this be started within 5 years of the comp plan adoption, is what you're saying, or will it be started within 10 years of, within 5, basically 6 to 10 years of comp plan adoption?
I don't know, Mary, what do you think?
Nan, go for 5. I don't know what might be drooling in 10 years. I don't know. I would go for 5.
Well, I'll be with you, Mary. So let's go.
Okay,
for
there you
5.
go.
Okay. Examine resource protection standards. I think this should go back in the A because we did that for water resources. So you're probably going to do them all at once. If you're going to examine it for water resources, you're probably going to do them all together. Open space preservation, include the duties of the pro, these new duties. I would think you want to do that right away, right?
Right away and ongoing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, and then coordinate with property owners, land conservancies.
But that's ongoing too.
I think
Everybody
that
agree?
goes with what came before. It's NA and an O.
Right.
Yeah, because I don't think it's being actively done, so it has to be started with the Okay, sorry about that. And then how to leverage funding. This seems like a pretty important one.
I mean, that's an ongoing. I think it's already started. Mary was talking about it.
Exactly. And I think the board's going to revisit the cell tower, money, because at the time it started, it was 10,500. It's over 120,000. So that's something the board has to look at. And how much do we want to put aside for open space recreation, and how much do we want to put in the open fund? I don't know. That's a discussion. So that is right now. It's ongoing.
I think it's ongoing because, as you say, Mary, things change. So it can't be
Exactly.
like,
Exactly.
pigeonholed into a time frame. It's just ongoing.
I agree.
Okay, then develop the prioritization for remaining available tracks.
Personally, I say that that's a 2-year. You start now. We've got official map and everything. You got to start looking now.
Mhm.
And
Everybody
ongoing.
else is 2-year.
I'm good with that.
Address stewardship and maintenance and open space projects. I think that should start pretty much. You should do that, start doing that right away, I think.
Yeah, and I think Janine,
I mean,
our
you don't have
pro
the
committee
money
has
right now,
done-
so maybe it's not, I don't know. There's
So
no
our
money
pro-
right now.
Committee's starting
Make it
on
an
it. You
O.
agree? Yeah, yeah.
So, everybody feels comfortable with?
Mhm.
Okay. And then into historic and scenic resources. This heritage interpretation stuff is already starting to happen a little bit through this Mason-Dixon project. So I think you're going to be, if this continues to move forward, I think this is going to be, it's going to start within 2 years. If the project gets, the project we talked about last month, if that gets funded as a plan, then we're headed in that direction already. So I would argue if it's an A, if you want to continue to show, the enthusiasm you had last month for the process. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, but I would also point out that aspects under this are ongoing as well.
Right. You're right. Promote historical commission as a liaison. I think this is ongoing, right?
Yeah.
Apply to become a certified local government. I think you need to I think you have almost everything you need, but you might need to line a couple other things up. So I'm not sure what the time frame would be for the township to, commit to line everything up. It would be worth investigating because, again, it's money, it's funds available for these types of historic resource projects.
Paul, I would put this to you. Do you think that's a 2-year program? Is that reasonable to you?
No, I don't, because
Okay.
if you look at the time I'm already investing in what Janine was talking about earlier, realistically, the earliest that this could happen is 5 years, and it might take longer than that, to be honest.
So if we put it at 5 years now and we have to revisit it, as we get closer to the 5-year time frame, that you would be comfortable with that?
Yeah, I just
Okay.
think that it's not a reasonable expectation to attempt to accomplish this in 2 years,
Okay.
given the situation now.
I think
Okay.
5 might be realistic because you do meet the basic criteria for a CLG.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're doing a 5-year on that. Okay.
Okay, so consider basically maintaining the atlas. That's obviously an O, but what about considering updating the 2004 Historic Resource Atlas? Is that
I mean,
it
when
sounds
we were
like that's an
talking
E to
about-
me
yeah, no, I mean,
in 10
yeah,
years.
I would say 10 years because we were talking 10 years. So this is both ongoing and 10 years.
Okay.
Okay, protect.
I may be drooling now.
Okay, we just have a couple left. Oh, this is our last one. Protect scenic resources from intrusions.
That's ongoing now and ongoing. I mean, it's something we got to do.
It's ongoing, but we do have this idea that you can actually do the scenic intrusions analysis where you would have to take action to do that analysis. Kenneth Township has a really great example of it. They did their first one probably 15 years ago now, and they're recently updating it now, where they actually do an analysis. And then when you get in land development plans, subdivision plans, whatever you have on these maps, what's where. And these intrusions can be anything from cell towers, it can be protection of ruins, it can be heritage trees, it can be historic resources. So you can basically take this entire chapter and fold it into an analysis and then have one analysis to go to when you get changes proposed to properties.
I have a question. So an intrusion, so when I did the easement here, one of the reasons my farm was lovely was because when you come down Appleton Road, you look across my fields. That was a scenic resource.
Mhm.
So does this gonna prohibit me from putting up a 6-foot fence when the traffic gets too bad on Appleton Road?
It's not really getting at fences. It would prohibit you from maybe putting, not that you can because your property's preserved, but if your property wasn't preserved, maybe putting a modern building or a cell tower.
Okay, but it's not
I
fenced.
guess you're right, Nan, though, if you go to that extreme, it depends on what your analysis says. That's why there's the scenic intrusions analysis. It depends on if the analysis says certain types of fencing is intrusive. Let's say a chain link fence is intrusive, but I don't know, a picket fence isn't intrusive or a rail fence isn't intrusive.
So I guess my question is that where does the intrusion get defined? I mean, because it's a little scary to say Big Brother tells you what you can and can't do around your property.
That's where you would do this analysis, and that's where it would get defined on what
And
it
the
means.
township could say, no, we don't want it, we don't care about fences, or we don't care
Yeah.
about whatever.
Yeah, it would be, the analysis is basically a guidance on this recommendation because this recommendation is pretty open-ended.
Right.
So the analysis gives you that manual, that guidebook for what this actually means and what something is that's scenic to you all. And really puts it all in one place. So you're not opening up the historic resources map and then opening up the woodlands map and then opening up the steep slopes map. You're really looking at it as a kind of an overlay, that site responsive situation. If you have 5 different natural resources in an area, let's just say, versus maybe 1 natural resource, then maybe that area where there's 5 resources together, that would be an area of higher priority for the analysis.
So it's kind of like the official map of, of scenic.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But starting that analysis, I don't imagine you're going to do that in the next 2 years at all by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, it's a big project. I would say.
It's a
10
big
years.
project. So I'm going to say maybe even within 10 years, right? I don't know.
It's a big project. Yeah.
I think it's probably an E for 10 years.
That would be my guess. I don't know what everybody else feels. Paul. Paul, do you have an idea? What do you think?
I think it's an E. At this point, you put anything more on any of us, it's an E.
You're gonna quit.
We'll all be drooling, so it won't matter.
Right,
Oh,
right.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
Come
just,
on, Paul, go for it.
Okay, we are now at 8:30, and actually we just finished the last selection of timeframes. So this actually worked out really well in just running through, the text and doing it this way.
Okay.
Next time around, when we're meeting, we will be looking at the Kimblesville chapter. In talking to Kathy and Joan and Nan, it seems like reviewing one chapter a month is a more realistic time frame. So I am going to be working to update the schedule to reflect that. The contract doesn't end till March 2022. So I think we're still okay for timing, but we will keep an eye on if a contract extension would be needed. I think we're still okay, because if you remember the contract, this was all going to be adopted and done in August, so way before the end of the contract timeframe. And now that you're seeing the chapters, the final chapters may have a photograph or two in them, but they're not going to look that much different than what you're seeing now. So it's not like we're going to come back towards the end of the process and everything's going to suddenly look different to you. The only things that'll be different, basically the only things that'll be different is what we're highlighting in yellow, which is why I'm highlighting them in yellow, so everybody can see, what's what. So are there any other questions? I think.
I just want to thank you, Janine. I agree with the one per meeting. I think that's about all we can get through, but I want to understand how much is remaining. How many chapters remain?
So we have 3 priority subject chapters left. We have Kimblesville. We have the one that I'm going to call infrastructure, which is roads and community facilities. And then we have the land use chapter.
Statement.
And then what happens after that is then we go back, we make the changes that we talked about in these chapters, and then we fold those chapters into the entire document. And if you remember at the very beginning of the process, we looked at a introductory chapter, and we looked at some demographics, and we looked at those types of chapters. And as we're going along, we're producing this matrix basically with these E, A's, O's. And so by the time we're done with that last priority subject chapter, which will be the 6th priority subject, you will have seen the priority subject chapters in detail, and you will have seen a good amount of the portions of the other chapters. So what we would then do, Kathy, is we might take a month break. We're going to see how it goes, and then produce the entire plan for you, and then bring back the document as one big plan.
And the document would have the data dump and the appendix, so to speak, where we do.
It would have the data dump of all the different public outreach,
right,
that you've already seen. And we've sort of produced that public outreach already in documents that were palatable for people to look at on the website. So I don't imagine we would be changing that around much. We would be just using what we've already given you on your website and putting that in the appendix, and then taking that demographic stuff that you initially reviewed, instead of having that up front where it was kind of clogging getting into the plan. If you remember, we would dump that in the back of the document also as reference material.
So Janine, we have an election in November.
Okay.
And what I'm hearing from you is this will all be done after the election, maybe early 2022. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I would imagine adoption. I think we're going to go right up to the end of the contract.
Okay.
So I would imagine adoption will probably be closer to February 2022 or March 2022.
Well, then we know how to answer to our constituents. Thank you.
Sure.
So I just have one question about maps. So I'm doing the walk tomorrow on the trail map, and the trail map has a lot of colors on it and all sorts of things. When we have the plan and it's produced and people are looking at it online, will the maps be able to start with a basic map, which would be the trails, and then you could add and say where are the horse farms, and then the person looking at it, could add the different layers, so to speak?
Yeah, I think when Rachel was here last month, she had this kind of 30,000 foot what I'm going to call a base map for trails, just as an example. And she basically had a base map of the township, and then she had like these big squishy arrows. And the big squishy arrows just gave the general direction that the trails would lead.
No,
So
I'm looking at a real trail map that I'm gonna.
No, I know. I'm just trying to, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was trying to answer your question saying, yes, there could be different types of maps. So the chapter might start with that map and just say this is a conceptual map, and then drill down into what you're talking about, where you're starting to get into really the weeds of the different colors and the different locations and the different proposed areas.
Well, I guess just, so what I'm asking actually is that if I wanted to go online and see our trail map and not, and have like the preserves and the trail map, and it would show all the trails, but then I wanted to add and say, well, let me see what farms are preserved. I could add that layer on and keep putting layers on as I wanted to see the information. Sorry, the information. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I feel like what you would be talking about is more of a digital recreation of the mapping versus like a still paper map that's going to be in the document, because the still paper map would have to show, one would show preserved open space and farmland, for example. One would show trails.
Okay.
It's almost like you would need a digital creation, which is kind of a cool idea on your website, but I think a different animal than this process.
Okay, I'll talk to Rachel, because I was looking at Joan today. She printed it out for me, and it looked like there was just too much information on it for if you just wanted to see where the trails were.
There's a lot of information on it. So I guess what I was trying to get at poorly is that there could be one map, there could be 3 maps, let's say, in that trail chapter. And one could be that squishy conceptual map for somebody that just wants to know the general concept and they don't want to go any further.
Right.
One could be overview of trails and sort of major trails and major trail connections. So you're getting the concept of where the trails are and the connections. And then one could actually go down into the details.
Got it. So we can decide later on what we want to do for the different maps. Okay.
Yeah, talk to Rachel about maybe those 3 concepts. So you have a map for different palettes of what somebody is looking for.
Because there was just a whole lot of information on it. It was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
I think it's a really cool idea, Nan. That almost sounds like an Eagle Scout, like coding job or something like that, where they could create, it's a database is all it really is.
It is.
Geography overlays.
Yeah, we have to do it on the website though, I guess. So like, I don't know.
Cool to do the overlays though on the website where you can turn them on and off. That would be really cool.
Yeah, that would work because it's pretty.
That'd be a good intern project.
Yes, it
Get
would.
a GIS intern for the township.
Yeah. Let's make Paul Lagasse do it.
Paul Lagasse, give him an E.
Give him an E, right? Give him an E.
No. Reach out to Dave. Dave, he's our computer guy. Like he doesn't have enough to do, right? Sorry, Dave.
With regard to
I think it's a good GIS intern project because you already have all the databases from this plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can package up the databases that we used and give them to you as a digital product.
Right. Okay. All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay, good meeting, everybody. I don't want to hold anybody over. 9 minutes
Jane,
over.
this is John Auerbach. I got one comment I wanted to address one of Nan's concerns about the intrusion and how that intrusion would impact her property and what she could do. And what you have to remember is that the comp plan is essentially a policy statement by the board and does not carry the force of law. So it doesn't allow itself to force a property owner to do anything. It's really a guideline to manage the township. The zoning has the force of law, and if it's written in there, that's enforceable, but anything in the comprehensive plan isn't enforceable by law. So I think she's okay there.
Correct. Thank you.
I have a question about Rachel. Did Rachel email a couple of us for a meeting? I did.
Rachel is trying to contact those who volunteered last month, and I think it's Nan, Kathy, and Paul Overton. Rachel has been emailing, trying to set up a date for you all to get together and have a Zoom and look at the map she's created and say, move this line, move that line, turn this to pink, turn this to orange. So she's looking for very specific direction from you all.
Right.
Now,
I offered to go for my walk, which I'm doing that tomorrow. And Joan and I looked at it today, and we can make some quick corrections and then make that meeting later on.
Okay, good. Yeah, if you just want to get back to Rachel, copy me in, obviously, which Rachel has, just so I know what's going on, but this is going to be mainly a Rachel thing.
Right,
You guys will coordinate with her on it.
right.
Cat,
So
Kat,
she has time
how
right
do
now
I-
too. She has a little bit of, I don't want to say free time, but she has some time to dedicate to this before she gets super overwhelmed again. So
Yeah,
just to
she
give you a
wanted
heads
it-
up.
Yeah, she wanted to work on it by the 4th of July.
Yeah, so because she actually has some breathing room at this moment. She wants to dedicate it to you guys before she gets, distracted with some other project.
Right. I can work with her if you want, Kathy, and then we can have our meeting later on if you want. So
Yeah, I mean,
take a
for
whole
me,
lot. I know you're busy.
yeah, I'm slammed right now. I think Chuck, did you have a question?
Well, I was supposed to be on that list too, but I haven't received anything.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't know. It came from Rachel. Well,
Yeah, here, I'll
I can
add
forward
you.
it to you.
I'm gonna add you now, Chuck, and just, I'm gonna address Rachel right now and say that, Nan, you'll get back to her. We'll get something done in her breathing time and then we can do something later, but I'll include you, Chuck.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else for tonight or shall we wrap it up?
Wrap it up.
Wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you,
seeing you
Janine.
guys.
Thank you.
Forward to meeting
Bye,
with you next
guys.
week, and
Thank
thank you for
you.
all the great input.
Good night.
See
Good
ya.
night.